Hey guys, it's the Anon Mouse, here again with another video. In the past, we've seen over and over again, especially when discussing the scientific and historic errors of the Quran, that the Quran will copy folktales, apocryphal works, and incorrect scientific theories, and try to pass them off as the infallible word of a god. Today, we will be discussing a pretty blatant work of plagiarism in the story of Dhul Qurnayn, and its relationship with the legends of Alexander the Great. Before we start, I just want to mention that the name Dhul Qurnayn means the two-horned one. This is relevant because in the Syriac legend, Alexander is described as having two horns on his head. And in the Ethiopic version of the story, Alexander is referred to as the two horns. Coins depicting Alexander with ram's horns on his head were first minted shortly after his death and were common currency in Arabia. This connection with Alexander and two horns was widely known across the region at the time. Before I start this presentation, I just want to say that I got a lot of this info from wikiislam.net. They're amazing, and you guys should definitely check them out. Today, we'll be comparing the story of Dhul Qurnayn, found in the Quran, Surah 18, with the story of the Alexander romance from the book The History of Alexander the Great, being the Syriac version. We'll have the page numbers below. This is a translated version of the Alexander romance into English. Now let's start. Quran, Surah 18, Ayah 84. Verily, we established his power on earth, and we gave him the ways and the means to all ends. Versus the Alexander Romance version, give me power from thy holy heavens, that I may receive strength greater than that of the kingdoms of the world, and that I may humble them, and I will magnify thy name, O Lord, forever, and thy memorial shall be everlasting to everlasting, and I will write the name of God in the charter of my kingdom, and that there may be for thee a memorial always. Notice how in both these versions, Alexander gets great strength from heaven. We go to the next passage in the Quran, where it says, one such way he followed, until, when he reached the setting of the sun, he found it setting in a spring of murky water. Near it, he found a people. We said, O Dhul Qurnayn, thou hast authority, either to punish them or to treat them with kindness. The corresponding section in the Alexander romance says, as to these things, my lord, which thy majesty or thy greatness desires to go and see, namely, upon what the heavens rest, and what surrounds the earth, the terrible seas which surround the world will not give thee a passage, because there are 11 bright seas, on which the ships of man sail, and beyond these there are about 10 miles of dry land, and beyond these 10 miles there is the fetid sea, Oceanus, which surrounds all of creation. They put their ships to the sea and sailed on the sea 4 months and 12 days, and they arrived at the dry land beyond the 11 bright seas. Now, in Muhammad ibn Ishaq, otherwise known as Ibn Ishaq's biography of Muhammad, otherwise known as Sirat Rasulullah, he records many other pre-Islamic Arabic poems. This one about Dhul Qurnayn that we show above says that it was claimed by a pre-Islamic king in ancient Yemen. Both these stories revolve around large bodies of water, and both of them are described as being muddy and fetid, perfectly linking the two adjectives described both in the Quranic and Syriac stories. Going forward in the Quran, it says, he said, whoever doth wrong, him shall we punish. Then shall he be sent back to his Lord, and he will punish him with a punishment here unheard of. In the corresponding section in the Alexandrian epic, it goes, and Alexander and his troops encamped, and he sent and called to him the governor who was in the camp, and said to him, are there any men here guilty of death? Then they said to him, we have 30 men and 7 men in bonds who are guilty of death. And the king said to the governor, bring hither those evildoers. And they brought them. And the king commanded them and said, go ye to the shores of the fetid sea, and hammer in stakes, that ships may be tied thereto, and prepare everything needful for a force about to cross the sea. And the men went and came to the shore of the sea. Now Alexander thought within himself, if it is to be true as they say, then everyone who comes near the fetid sea dies. It is better that they who are guilty of death should die. And when they had gone and arrived at the shore of the sea, they died instantly. Notice how in both sections, as soon as Alexander or Dhul Qurnayn come near the fetid sea, he in some way or form passes judgment that is equivalent to death to people who have committed crimes. Notice how it's very similar. The Quran then says, "Then followed he another way, until when he came to the rising of the sun, he found it rising on a people for whom we had provided no covering, protection against the sun." The corresponding version in the Alexandrian epic goes, "So the whole camp mounted, and Alexander and his troops went up between the fetid sea and the bright sea to the place where the sun entered the window of heaven. For the sun is a servant of the Lord, and neither by night nor by day does he cease from his traveling. The place of his rising is over the sea, and the people who dwell there, where when he is about to rise, flee away and hide themselves in the sea, and that they not be burnt by his rays. And he passes through the midst of the heavens and place to the place where he enters the window of heaven. And wherever he passes there are terrible mountains, and those who dwell there have caves hollowed out in the rocks. And as soon as they see the sun passing over them, men and birds flee away from before him and hide in the caves. For rocks are rent by his blazing heat and fall down, and wherever there be men or beasts, as soon as the stones touch them, they are consumed." Notice the parallels. After crossing the fetid sea and having criminals killed, the protagonists find an area where the sun enters, either into a pool in the Quranic account or in the window of heaven in the Alexandrian account, and they find people afflicted by the might of the nearby sun when it rises. The Quran then continues, "Then followed he another way, till when he came between the two mountains, he found upon their hither side a folk that scarce could understand a saying." The Alexandrian version goes, "And Alexander said, Let us go forth by the way to the north. And they came to the confines of the north, and entered Armenia and Azerbaijan, and inner Armenia. And they crossed over the country of Turn-Agios, and Beth Pardia, and Beth Tekil, and Beth Drubil, and Beth Katarmen, and Beth Gebel, and Beth Zamrat. Alexander passed through nil these places, and he went and past Mount Musas, and entered a plain, which is Bahi Lebda, and he went and encamped by the gate of the great mountain." Notice in both that the story is continuously being the same, and the next thing he does is go to a mountain. Ayah 94 says, "They said, O Dhul Qurnayn, the Gog and Magog do great mischief on earth. Shall we then render thee tribute in order that thou mightst erect a barrier between them and us?" The Alexandrian version goes, "Alexander said, This mountain is higher and more terrible than all the mountains which I have seen. The old men and the natives of the country said to the king, Yeah, by your majesty, my lord the king, neither we nor our fathers have been able to march one step in it, and the men do not ascend it either on that side or on this, for it is the boundary which God has set between us and the nations within it." Alexander said, "Who are the nations within this mountain upon which we are looking?" The natives of the land said, "They are the Huns." He said to them, "Who are their kings?" The old men said, "Gog and Magog." Alexander said to the natives of the country, Have they come forth to spoil in your days?" The old men answered and said to the king, "My God establish thy kingdom and thy crown, my lord the king. These fortresses which have been overturned in our lands and in the lands of the Romans have been overthrown by them. By them have these towers been uprooted. When they go forth to spoil, they ravage the land of the Romans and of the Persians, and they enter their own territory." There's little need to comment on the similarities. The protagonists are near the mountains, and people tell them about the horrible tribe that lives nearby. Interestingly, the tribe has the exact same name in both groups, in both stories. The next ayah goes, he said, "The power in which my Lord has established me is better than tribute. Help me, therefore, with strength and labor. I will erect a strong barrier between you and them." The Alexandrian version goes, "When Alexander had heard what the old men said, he marveled greatly at the great sea which surrounded all creation. And Alexander said to his troops, Do ye desire that we should do something wonderful in this land? They said to him, As thy majesty commands, we will do. The king said, Let us make a gate of brass and close up this breach. There's no need to comment. The similarities are extremely striking. The stories are nearly identical, and that only continues going forward. Ayah 96 goes, "Bring me sheets of iron," until, when he had leveled them between the two mountain walls, he said, "Blow with bellows." Until, when he had made it like fire, he said, "Bring me, that I may pour over it molten copper." The Alexandrian version goes, "And Alexander commanded and fetched 3,000 smiths, workers in iron, and 3,000 men, workers in brass. And they poured down brass and iron, and kneaded it with as a man kneads when he works clay. Then they brought it and made a gate, the length of which was 12 cubits, and its breadth 8 cubits. And he made a lower threshold from mountain to mountain, the length of which was 12 cubits." There's not much to say about this either. They're almost exactly the same. Ayah 97 goes, "Thus were they made powerless to scale it or to dig through it." The corresponding counterpart goes, "He fixed the gate and the bolts, and he placed nails of iron and beat them down one by the other, so that if the Huns came and dug out the rock which was under the threshold of iron, even if the footmen were able to pass through, a horse with its rider would be unable to pass, so long as the gate that was hammered down with bolts stood." How could anything get more similar? Ayah 98 says, "He said, 'This is a mercy from my Lord, but when the promise of my Lord comes to pass, he will make it unto dust, and the promise of my Lord is true. On that day we shall leave them to surge like waves, one on one another. The trumpet will be blown, and we shall collect them all together." The corresponding passage says, "And the Lord will gather together the kings and their hosts, which are within this mountain, and they shall all be assembled at his beck, and shall come with their spears and swords, and shall stand behind the gate, and shall look up to the heavens, and shall call upon the name of the Lord, saying, O Lord, open to us this gate. And the Lord shall send his sign from heaven, and a voice shall call on this gate, and it shall be destroyed and fall at the beck of the Lord, and it shall not be opened by the key with which I have made for it. And a troop shall go through this gate which I have made, and a full span shall be worn away from the lower threshold by the hoofs of the horses, which with their riders shall go forth to destroy the land by the command of the Lord." Even the prophecy at the end is the same. I really don't have much else to comment. This is quite striking. Almost every element of the short Quranic tale finds a more explicit and detailed counterpart in the Syriac Alexander legend. In both texts, the related events happen in precisely the same order and have almost the exact same details. As it is, the correspondences shown earlier are still so exact that it's obvious that they share the same source. We've talked over and over again about this happening throughout the Quran, but I really like somebody to explain it to me. Why is it that so many parts of the Quran are presented in almost the exact same way in earlier fictitious legends and stories? And I have to stress, all these stories are fictitious fairy tales and legends. None of this ever happened.